Hello, this is Robert Patrick, veteran playwright, author of, among other plays, Judas, which is being done by the Phoenix Theater Ensemble, and I am on Dave's Gone By with Peter Fitzgerald from UNC Radio.
Well, hello, Aru. This is Peter Fitzgerald here with you, gay icon and lover of all things theatrical. I haven't been on this program in so long. It is so great to be back here and talking to a playwriting legend. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a man who is part of the off-Broadway movement. People like Langford Wilson and Sam Shepard and William Hoffman, and this man, Robert Patrick, a founder of the gay play movement as well. He made his name with a play called The Haunted Host. His play Kennedy's Children was on Broadway. He even won a Tony for actress Shirley Knight. Woo! So he also has an old play of his that is being revived by the Phoenix Theater Ensemble off-off-Broadway at the Wild Project. He'll tell you all about it. He'll tell you all about everything. Please welcome to the neighborhood, Robert Patrick. Hello!
Well, hello, Mr. Fitzgerald.
How are you this fine day?
I'm fine. Very excited about the Phoenix Theater's production of my play Judas, opening April 27th in New York City. I wish I could be there, but I can't.
You're out in California, aren't you?
I've lived in Los Angeles now for 25 years.
No, please. I mean, I am a dyed-in-the-wool, born and bred New Yorker. How on earth did you give up New York for that wasteland out there?
Well, the New York that I loved had more or less disappeared by the time I left. I was widely known as New York's most produced playwright, and I was burning out left and right, and it was just time for me to leave. So I came out to Los Angeles in 1993 to take a job with a public relations firm.
So what, you didn't even go out there the way most playwrights do to write movies and direct and do all that. You went in a whole different direction.
Oh, yes, I had given up. I retired from theater, and the public relations firm that I came out here to work for died very quickly.
Oh.
But I just stayed and vegetated for 20 years. And then 5 years ago, a group of young people here in L.A. who had read my plays in school looked me up and bullied me into going back into theater as a performer.
Wow.
They discovered I could sing, and I've suddenly become in demand all over L.A. as a singer, and it's a whole new life and a whole new world that I've entered as a performer.
Well, congratulations on that. But we rode over that whole story so quickly. Let's go backwards a little bit. Most produced playwright in New York, and I can understand a lot of demands on you, but if they're producing your same play over and over in different places, that isn't as demanding as being forced to write a play a week. Why did you burn out?
Well, I was also producing them, directing them, lighting them.
Oh.
Filming them, promoting them. And there was a new play every week, practically. Samuel French called me New York's most produced playwright.
And I didn't realize it was because you were producing so many shows yourself. But this was in the early 1960s, am I right?
I started in the early 1960s. I left in 1993.
So the first play that you did, was that The Haunted Host?
That was The Haunted Host at a wonderful place called the Cafe Cino, which was the first off-off-Broadway theater. May I define off-off for your listeners?
Oh, please do.
Okay, there's Broadway, which is the theater you hear about where Bette Midler does Hello, Dolly. That's the great big...
Actually, it's Bernadette now. You are out of touch. Wiggle!
That's the great big glitzy Times Square theaters.
Yes.
Off-Broadway, which is smaller theaters with smaller admission prices, which can afford to do slightly more experimental stuff. Then in 1957, there came to be off-Broadway when Joe Cino opened the Cafe Cino in Greenwich Village and started doing plays for free on the floor of his cafe. The other arts all entered their experimental phase 100 years before in Paris. But there was a special problem with theater. It costs money to do. It requires critical approval.
Yes.
To make a living, you've got to be popular, you've got to be conformist to one degree or another. But when Joe Cino got the idea to do plays on the floor of his cafe for free, nobody was paid and nobody was charged for seeing them, suddenly we could do anything we wanted to, because the public's approval, or the priest's approval, or the police's approval, or the press's approval didn't matter. We did them for 2 weeks, and then another play came in. So at the Cafe Cino in Greenwich Village in the 1960s, theater entered the modern era, which the other arts had entered in Paris 100 years before.
It must have been incredibly exciting.
It was a tremendously exciting thing to be part of. I wandered in by accident. My first half hour in New York City, I wandered into the Cafe Cino following a long-haired boy.
Well,
And I never left, as far as I'm concerned. I was a great devotee of the modern painting movement, and I realized right away that I was part of something just like it. For 3 years, I was a temple slave at the Cino. I'd leave my office job at 5 o'clock every day and run to the Cino to do whatever needed doing just to be allowed to be there. Then in 1964, when I was helping move the scenery into the Cino for the first genius of off-off-Broadway, Lanford Wilson's first play, I suddenly got an idea for a play. It had never occurred to me that I might actually be an artist in theater. I was content to sweep the floors and wait the tables. But suddenly I had an idea for a play, and entirely because there was the Cafe Cino, I wrote it. It was called The Haunted Host, and I brought it into Joe Cino, and he did it. And lo and behold, it was a hit, and suddenly I was Robert Patrick the playwright instead of Robert Patrick the doorman.
now what was that idea for The Haunted Host? What struck you as the plot of that show?
I wanted to write about someone who was not loved enough. The hero of The Haunted Host has not received the love he deserved, and the one he wanted it from has died.
Oh.
He exorcises the ghost of that unhappiness by refusing to involve himself in another such affair, and also saves the other person from going through the same horror.
Dare I ask, was there any autobiography there?
Not really. It was based on Joe Cino, but I didn't make it an Italian man. Anybody can play it. But I learned right away, I wound up playing the lead role. It was that casual at the Cino.
Sure.
And one night, as I was standing listening to the other actor in the play do a monologue, a boy at a table right next to me said to his parents, who he had brought to see the show, "Mom, Dad, you see that man standing there? That's why I brought you here. I wanted you to see him. Mom, Dad, I'm like him. I'm a homosexual." And I suddenly realized that what we were doing had larger ramifications than just ego gratification for us.
Well, did you, either at the Cino or elsewhere at that time, ever experience any hassling from the cops, etc.?
No, the Cino was blissfully free from persecution. It was illegal to do plays in a coffee house. Don't ask me why. All around us, the coffee houses were doing poetry and music, but plays were specifically illegal. So our brilliant poster designer, Kenny Burgess, would do our posters so they looked like abstract art. And the cops would walk by and think it was an art gallery and not bother us.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You to tilt their heads to see what the title of that week's play was.
Are you the keeper of the flame of the Cino? Because there's a website of Cino history, and you seem to be the curator of that. Do you have stacks and boxes of just incredible memorabilia?
Well, they're all in the New York City Library or in the One Institute here in L.A. now. Yes, I did have them. I became, by default, the keeper of the flame. When I got a computer, I started collecting what little Cino memorabilia I had and putting it online, and people started sending me more, and it turned into something quite enormous and expensive.
Oh.
Let me tell you. But now the New York City, the Lincoln Center Library, has an official Cino collection, and so has the One Institute here in L.A., so all of that stuff is physically safe, we hope.
Now, were you also involved in places like Theater for the New City and La Mama and maybe some other places that no longer exist?
I almost wrote the first play for La Mama.
Oh, tell us.
It was called One Arm. It was from a short story by Tennessee Williams.
Oh.
And the man who produced it, Andy Milligan, asked me to write it. But I thought he wanted something rather sleazy, so little Puritan snob that I am, or was, I refused, and he wrote it himself, and it was the first play at La Mama, so I almost opened La Mama.
Now, let me ask you also then, did you know Tennessee Williams personally?
I met Tennessee Williams when he came to the opening night of my play Kennedy's Children on Broadway, and there's a joke about him in it, and he laughed louder at it than anybody else, and came to my party at Sardi's, and I have a wonderful photo of him and me together. He couldn't have been sweeter. And the next day he called me. He was in town to promote a book.
Yeah.
And he said that he had tried with every reporter that was interviewing him to promote Kennedy's Children and had been universally told they were not allowed to plug that play.
Oh, now wait a minute. Is this a true thing that I heard, that for many, many years, the New York Times, either the writers could not review a gay play, or if they did, it had to be a slam. It had to be negative. And it's an unwritten thing, but was that kind of the known truth?
I don't know if it was because there's a gay character in it, or because the English critics, Kennedy's Children was a big hit all over Europe before it came to New York. And the British critics, the London critics, all razzed the New York papers for missing me, for not having discovered me in New York. And the boy who interviewed me for the New York Times called me and said he had been ordered to make me look like a fool in the interview.
Whoa.
There was something out, but anyway, Tennessee Williams said he had been told that he could not plug the play, so he got, when he was on a live radio show where they couldn't censor him, they asked him if his sister, Rose, who was with him, was having a good time in New York, and he took the chance, it being live, and said, yes, she especially liked the finest play I've seen by a young playwright in many years, Robert Patrick Kennedy's Children.
Very nice. That's nice.
He called me to tell me he had done that, and we made a date to meet in London the next week for lunch.
Yeah.
And I gave the cab driver the wrong hotel name, and we didn't connect except by phone ever again.
When talking with Robert Patrick, whose other play, Judas, is being revived by the Phoenix Theater Ensemble. It's running in late April through mid-May at the Wild Project, 195 East 3rd Street. So tell us, this play, by the way, and I am very sorry to say this, is not gay at all.
No, I was writing a series of plays, parodies of film styles. I'd written a parody musical and a parody romance. And I love the old Bible epic movies like Ten Commandments.
Uh-huh.
I thought I would write a parody of a Bible movie. I was going to write a play about the crucifixion in which the hero was Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea at the time. And it got away from me and became quite a serious play. I didn't know I'd thought so much about all of that. And instead of being a parody, it turned into quite a serious play in which Pontius Pilate tries to talk Jesus Christ out of being crucified.
That would be pretty easy to do for me. And it's like, oh, they're going to nail you and kill you. Maybe you should not be crucified. I'd be like, okay, good idea. I'm going to go for ice cream instead.
Well, poor Pontius Pilate finds it impossible, of course.
Of course.
And we see some of Christ's background, so hopefully you come out understanding why he would do such a terrifying thing. We finished Judas the same week that I finished Kennedy's Children, and they were both lying on my shelf where I kept the stack of plays that I wrote. They were always fresh ones. And this young director came in and said he had been offered a date at a theater. And did I have a script? And I just waved my hand at the stack, said, take what you like. And it happened that he took Kennedy's Children and not Judas. And I've always wondered what would have happened in 1973 if Judas, rather than Kennedy's Children, had been produced.
Do you go through moments like that, like a lot of playwrights, where it's coming out of you and without even thinking about it, you're doing the best work, at least at that stage of your career, and then it ebbs and flows?
Oh, yes. I don't think I've ever written a better play than Judas. And it's been done only a few times. There's always people who are leery about my having rewritten the Bible. Sir John Gielgud wanted to do Judas. He wanted to play Pilate.
What happened?
I flew to America at his request to discuss production with the producer he had chosen for it, who just kept saying to me, but Bob, you've rewritten the Bible. And Richard Burton was going to do it, and James Mason was going to do it.
Oh, my goodness.
Was going to do it, and they all got movies.
Oh.
Craig Smith is going to play it in New York. Craig was a member of an ensemble which did the play 30 years ago, and he played Judas. He played the young man Judas.
So a Cocktail Rep did the show?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't... See, what happened was there was this company called the Cocktail Repertory Theater downtown over on Bowery Lane. Well, I didn't realize they did plays that were more modern that way. They tended to do Moliere and the classics of foreign theater and so forth. And then that company died, but they rose again. They were rebirthed as the Phoenix Ensemble, which is run by Craig Smith and his wife Elise Stone, and he is going to be starring in this revival of Judas.
He'll play Pontius Pilate. He played Judas 30 years ago, so he's lived with the play for 30 years, and he feels that he has come of age to do Pontius Pilate, and I'm sure he's going to be brilliant at it.
Now, are you going to come in and see the production, or are you just out in Cali and that's it?
Alas, I probably will not be able to be in New York in April or May. The play was scheduled earlier. It was scheduled for February of last year. There was a confusion at the theater where it was scheduled. They were doing another play about Judas as well and actually got the two mixed up. Weird. There's only two plays in the world about Judas. And
what are the odds, you know? Pontius Pilate Superstar, that's a third one.
Be there, but I'm so excited that Craig and his company are going to finally put it on 3rd Street, just around the corner from where Cocteau used to be.
Now, let me also ask Robert Patrick here. You mentioned that you were kind of doing a genre spoof when you started writing Judas, and then it got more and more serious. Were you raised in a religious, Catholic-y sort of, being Irish?
No, I'm not at all Irish. My people were migrant workers in the Southwest with no leftover European cultural background at all. My real name is Robert Patrick O'Connor.
O'Connor? And you're not Irish?
Well, I guess it's of Irish derivation, but we had no remnants of European culture whatsoever. Just Dust Bowl migrant workers.
And were your parents, at what point were you able to come out to them?
Oh, never.
Oh, dear. Oh.
We're talking New Mexico in the 1950s.
What, could they guess?
I think they vaguely knew. I was very lucky as a gay person. I was spared gay shame because the subject was so appallingly frightening and disgusting in the world I came from that it was never even mentioned. I was never even told there are homosexuals, don't be one. It simply was not mentioned. One could, of course, take it for granted. One picked it up vaguely. woman to hear men called a sissy and all that. But I was very lucky. I was never shamed, and I was a reader. Literature of the past, I discovered there were and had always been men like me who desired men. So,
and when did you realize that was, you weren't just confused, or you weren't just like all the other kids who like girls? When did you actually say, oh, I am this?
When I was 5.
Oh, okay.
In Grand Prairie, Texas.
Whom were you lusting after when you were 5 years old?
Another 5-year-old. Let's not get too personal.
Oh, Wiggle, I'm just saying. So, at some point you had to get the hell out of New Mexico to be who you were.
In Clovis, New Mexico, in 1950, my slumber parties were notorious.
Okay. All right. So, fine, the door was closed, you did what you did, you discovered, but as a teenager, you probably realized if you wanted to fully blossom, you had to go elsewhere.
Yes, we were used to relocating as a family of migrant workers. My senior year of high school in Roswell, New Mexico, was the first year I ever went to one school for a whole year. And my folks stayed in Roswell, so I always say Roswell's my hometown. It's simpler than explaining.
Now, hold on. Did you ever see a UFO? Is there anything, quote-unquote, out there? Not just you being out, but...
Not in Roswell. You have to understand, Roswell is only tangentially associated with the UFO thing. The actual crash took place quite a ways from Roswell, but Roswell had an Air Force base, and they sent a plane to the crash site to take the bodies of the inhabitants of it back to the Roswell Air Force Base. Therefore, it became associated with Roswell.
You lived there for over a year. Was it a point of pride among the town that we had this, or was it embarrassed or nobody believed it, or you all did believe it?
It really wasn't that big a thing.
Oh, okay.
The only time I ever saw one was in a town called Clovis, New Mexico. It made the whole town shake.
Wiggle.
We all talked about it for a day, and then the next day we were on to something else.
Huh. That was before the interwebs, when people would just hash over things over and over again. You're just, I guess...
My mother dated the pilot who flew the plane that flew the bodies of the aliens to the Roswell Airport.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
My mother dated the pilot.
So that was true. That happened.
Many years later, when he was dying, he called a press conference and confessed that he had been that man.
See, I thought the whole thing was a big old hoax. I didn't realize that a crash did happen, and there was a pilot who did stuff, and your mom dated him? Good Lord. That's an amazing story.
We're getting a little bit far afield.
Well, that should be your next play. Are you still writing plays?
No, I more or less quit writing when I moved to L.A.
So you appear in other people's plays now when you act, or...?
Don't act in other people's plays. I sing my own songs.
Oh, excuse me. So what are some kinds of songs that you sing when you do your one-person musical appearances?
Well, I've done 3 solo concerts as well as being in over 100 evenings at nightclubs of other people's shows.
Ooh.
My favorite song, and the one that pleases the audiences the most, is called MGM.
MGM. Is it about the golden age, like we recently had the Oscars, or?
Yes. Would you care to hear a bit of it?
I'd love to, of course.
Life has brought me plenty, but way back in 1920, I could have been signed by MGM. They had 6 or 7 more stars than there are in heaven, all of them designed by MGM. There.
That is love, and by the way, no one would ever guess you were gay. I can't, no, I'm kidding about that, but you have a nice voice. It's a very, lot of vibrato there. Who is your mentor in terms of idols of singing?
I never knew that I could sing until 5 years ago. These kids who discovered me out here put me in a show and asked, part of my job in the show was to sing a little song. And I could, of course, sing a little song. And to our great astonishment, I got a standing ovation.
Well, you have presence and a belt. And not to mention you're on key. I mean, you have a pretty good cabaret voice.
Thank you. And then a lovely lady, very well known here in Los Angeles, named Lori D'Amato, heard me sing and volunteered to give me lessons for free. And I was so flattered. And it's worked out very well.
Now, you are about 80 years old at the moment?
I am 80.
Oh, 80. Congratulations. Yay. How do you feel? Have you slowed down any, or do you get up on stage and still feel 20 years old?
Well, I do fine on stage.
But you feel like elsewhere.
A little bit of scoliosis and memory lapse in real life, but I do fine on stage, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about them. Is it short-term memory stuff?
Yeah, I don't know who I've met and who I haven't. I just treat everybody like an old friend.
There you go. Here's another question. You have a name that sounds like a pretty common name. There is an actor named Robert Patrick who did the Terminator movies.
Yes.
Do you get checks for him from unions? Did you ever get calls for acting roles and they think, oh, we meant the other guy?
When I first moved to Los Angeles in 1993 was the first time that my pen name, Robert Patrick, had been in a phone book. And I instantly began getting phone calls and fan mail for the young actor, whose real name is Robert Patrick, who has scored a great success as the liquid metal monster in Terminator 2.
Right.
So I found out his address and forwarded his fan mail to him and got a charming note back thanking me for it and telling me that when he had first become an actor, he had, of course, been a waiter in a restaurant, and the restaurant had a poster up for Kennedy's children.
Oh!
Always made him feel good to know that someone named Robert Patrick could be famous.
Now,
and I hadn't the heart to tell him that restaurant was famous for posting only the posters for terrible flops.
Yeah, you didn't need to mention that. And by the way, it might have been a commercial flop, but as you said, Kennedy's Children was a big hit all over London. But let me ask, would you say that your greatest métier, if you will, as a playwright, was the monologue?
No, not particularly. I'd only written one-person play before I wrote Kennedy's Children, which is all monologue.
Yeah, it's monologues back and forth, yes.
I had just lost a lover in 1969, and I was feeling suicidal, and I got a call from the manager of a theater saying, remember, you have a date here next week. You haven't been in to rehearse. And it suddenly occurred to me that I could go on stage opening night and shoot myself. But I thought I'd go over and pretend to be rehearsing. I was being cagey. I was out of my mind.
Yes.
So I got to the theater, and I was going to sit in the back room and brood and gloat over how sorry they'd all be. And this young boy, this young student of theater, came in and said, I heard you were rehearsing. Can I observe you? So I didn't know what else to do. I said, sure. And started improvising a monologue. And in this monologue, I was addressing my lost lover in the audience of the theater and telling my version of our story and begging him to come back to me. And after about 15 minutes, I realized this is good. And I ran and called a lighting designer I knew and told her to get over to the theater. I had something hot. So she came in, and I kept going over and over this one-person play, and she kept putting lights up, and by the end we had 45 minutes of just knockout theater. And we opened that night, and it was a great success. And guess what? My lover came back to me.
Oh, when you said you lost your lover in 1969, I thought you dead. I didn't realize he went away, he turned you down or something. Because you also have a monologue that Harvey Fierstein has done on his record and in his act, This Is Not Going to Be Pretty, called Poof Positive, that
Yes.
he wrote. And that's about very different kinds of people or reasons for people actually dying.
Well, that was written at the request of another lover, Robin Wood, who I hadn't seen for some years, and he came to see a play of mine, and he was obviously ill, and he said he had come to say goodbye to me. He had AIDS, and he had come to say goodbye to me and to commission me to write a funny play about AIDS. So it was at his command that I wrote Poof Positive, with which Harvey Fierstein had a great hit. Harvey is so great. Some people say that I discovered Harvey, but that's not quite true. Harvey was discovered by everybody all at once the moment he stepped onto a stage. And I was just lucky enough to be the first person who had an equity role to offer him.
Well, still, you were there early on. He did The Haunted Host, and he even did a revival of The Haunted Host in 1991.
Harvey has done Haunted Host 4 times.
Oh, wow.
God bless his heart.
So you went through the AIDS era in New York. What was that like?
Well, it was horrible.
Well, yes.
When you was dying, it was just ghastly.
Were you afraid for yourself or just for the people around you?
I was afraid for myself, but I got checked immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you change your ways, as it were?
Well, sure. I mean, it was death, I mean, hideous disease and death.
With no cure at that point. It was an automatic death sentence when that was happening.
Thing where you'd meet somebody and they'd say, I'm not feeling well, and 2 days later they were dead.
Were you an activist in terms of ACT UP or the other organizations, or did you just write? Did you write your way through that era?
I guess you'd say I wrote my way through. I was always helping take care of people if I could. I was traveling a great deal. That was during the Kennedy children years. For 10 years, I traveled to schools and school theater festivals around the country. I was in 49 states. I'm told that I visited 1,000 schools, but that seems exaggerated.
But even so, and you were just giving them education on it's okay to be gay, or was it sex education like wear this, do that?
It was theater education.
Oh.
Talking about off-off-Broadway and gay theater mostly.
Which in its way was political by telling people, hey, there's this whole world of theater out there of people who should be accepted, etc. And so that's wonderful. Do you still lecture? Do you still ever do that for schools?
When I'm asked, yes. For the internet, my basic lecture on the Cafe Cino and gay theater is online.
Is it on YouTube or where? Where can people find it?
Yes, it's on YouTube.
I want to hear some more stories, though, about the people you knew when you were starting out at the Cafe Cino and places like that. Like you said, Lanford Wilson was the first genius of off-off-Broadway, but let's have an anecdote about him, a story.
Lanford was so obviously brilliant from the first time he put pen to paper. He wandered to New York with a friend, Michael Powell, and Lanford had been writing prose, but it was the shows he saw at the Cafe Cino that encouraged him to turn his talents to playwriting. And from the first plays, which are all unfortunately lost, I called him the Mozart from Missouri.
So, but what about some other folk, like Sam Shepard? Did you know him?
Sam came a little later. Sam did just one show at the Cino, but he was very much around. He loved Joe Cino, and Joe loved him. Sam was practically the only straight playwright off-Broadway. Sam and John Guare, I think, were just about the only straight ones.
Okay, well, it was a haven. It was a place where... What about women? Was Maria Irena Fornes there, or any other folks like that?
Yeah, Maria Irene Fornes. She hung out at the Cino a lot. She did all her shows over at Judson Church, which had a certain aesthetique that appealed to her. And we had Megan Terry and Rosalind Drexler, and Rochelle Owens.
Oh, Rochelle, she wrote Futz, right?
She did indeed.
What about John Glines? We haven't really mentioned him. Was he sort of a separate entity?
John was a producer, not a writer. Well, I mean, he was a writer, but he became known as a producer.
But
John did a lot of my plays and Harvey's plays and Jane Chambers' plays. Goodness, it was John who produced my play T-Shirts, starring me and Jack Wrangler.
Oh, my goodness.
Star. Jack Ringley decided he wanted to return to the stage, having already been the biggest gay and straight porn star in the world. And I had a play that had a great role for him, and it was going to be him and Harvey Fierstein. But Harvey got famous right then and went on to do his own plays, so I wound up having to play the funny fat fag in T-shirts. And John Glines produced that. John did all sorts. He did William Hoffman's plays.
William Hoffman, who went on to write As Is.
Which was Tony nominated, and he also wrote the libretto for an opera, for the Metropolitan Opera. My goodness, really was very...
Can I ask you about a playwright that has been kind of forgotten, but that friends of mine knew? I don't know if you knew him. He was more of a La Mama centric than Cino, but Bob Reinhold, does that ring a bell?
Oh, yes, I knew Rob. I don't remember his plays. I knew him well.
Any stories or any recollections about him?
He was shy, perhaps less extravagantly witty or entertaining than we tended to be.
Okay. Just that's all. That's the only memories of him?
More or less.
Because my friends knew him in later life, when he was not physically well, and obviously he'd never attained the success of a Langford Wilson or of John Guare or some of the other folks that you mentioned. So.
I don't really remember his plays, I'm sorry to say.
They were kind of literary, a lot of things where he would rework Greek tragedies and things like that, too, as far as I've been told. By the way, we're talking with Robert Patrick, the playwright and now the singer, if you're on the West Coast. When are you performing next on the West Coast?
Later this month, I'm in a show called Planet Queer.
A show called Planet Queer. Where's that taking place?
At a bar called Akbar in Silver Lake, Los Angeles.
Akbar in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. So...
I also often appear in a review called KDD, and in another called Was ist das? I'm all over the place.
Yes, in fact, you're all over the place. You've moved away from the telephone. We're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in a lot of shows. I have 3 friends who each produce a review monthly, so most months I'm in 1, 2, or 3 shows.
Oh, lovely. Do you travel at all anymore, or are you going to stay basically coastal there?
I stay basically here. Last year, 2017 in February, I was in New York. They revived 5 one-acts of mine at La Mama on 4th Street, and they brought me there to see it. It was brilliant.
So can I ask you, we've talked a bit about The Haunted Host and, of course, Judas and Kennedy's Children. What are maybe 1 or 2 other plays, whether they're full-length or short, that you really would love to see revived?
Well, I've always been amazed that every theater in the world wasn't doing my play, The Golden Circle. It's a play about the 12 astrological signs shipwrecked on a desert island, and they interact and create and destroy civilization based on the interplay of their archetypal personalities.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Called The Golden Circle, and I've always been amazed that it wasn't done in every theater in the world. There's a play called The Beaux-Arts Ball, which is a play for 12 women and 1 man.
Ooh.
That takes place in the ladies' room at the Beaux-Arts Ball in Paris from 1900 to 1965.
Well, that sounds amazing.
It's such an opportunity for female performers and designers because each of the women is dressed in the style of the artist for whom she is a model.
At least during that period, from the late 1950s through, let's say, the 90s, when you were really prolific and you have all these plays still on your desk, on shelves, they were done way back when, but perhaps not much since then, how do you stop yourself from going to, say, a Craig Smith at Phoenix Ensemble and saying, oh, wonderful, you're doing Judas. Now please do this one, and revive that one, and call them every week and say, if you have a slot, I've got to play.
I do that. And my plays out constantly.
Well, so where else are your plays done across America over the past few months?
Let me finish my list of favorite plays.
Sure, please.
Many people, including Lanford, thought that my best play was Michelangelo's Models. It's about Michelangelo and his models. It takes place when he's in Rome waiting to decorate the Sistine Chapel, and his quarrels with Pope Julius and his interactions with Tommaso de Cavalieri, the love of his life. I was always trying to get Eve at the Jean Cocteau Theater.
That's the thing. If you're a playwright and you have an in with the artistic director, or you know someone who knows someone, it's just, I don't know how you stop yourself from sending a mail, sending an email, a postcard saying, hey, if you haven't filled up your next season's schedule, how about this, how about this, how about this, without trying to be a nudge.
Makes me think that I stop myself. I do submit my plays. They're online.
Well, yes, but unless you nudge somebody to say, hey, have you looked at my website lately? There's a play that would be perfect.
Well, I don't know how much more plainly to tell you. I do. I constantly send people my play.
In your official biography or autobiography, it mentions that at a certain period of time, you did ghostwrite some screenplays.
When I first hit L.A. in 1993, I met some young TV writers who had signed on for more than they could handle. They'd gotten jobs and they weren't sure they could do them. So they would hire me to come in and help them, and uncredited. And they'd pay me a lot of money, and that's how it works.
Well, can you tell us what shows you secretly worked on?
Well, I shouldn't really know. There's one I got credit on, a surfer detective series shot in Australia called High Tide.
Oh my god! Well, but you got an official credit on that one. That's really cool.
My only film credit.
So it was a movie, not a TV show.
No, it was a TV show.
Oh, was it?
What do you call it? It's my only media credit.
Media credit was High Tide. Is that still? Is that on DVD or something? Can people find it somewhere?
I've no idea.
We'll have to look for that. And we'll have to look for all the things that Robert Patrick is still doing, whether he's appearing musically on the West Coast, or whether you're going to see his play, which is being revived at the Phoenix Theater Ensemble, Judas, and is being done at, physically, the Wild Project on East 3rd Street from April 27th through May 13th. Definitely go see it. Sounds like a fabulous and really interesting show. And by the way, can we give out your website so people can find out more about you and your Cafe Cino archives?
Well, on Facebook, I'm Robert Patrick Playwright.
Robert Patrick Playwright on Facebook, and that will be the gateway to all these other things, Patrick. So, before we let you go, last question for Robert Patrick, and we thank you so much for being with us. So, what do you hope for now that you are 80 years old? What are your hopes for the next decade? Be it for you or more generally politically, because it must be a difficult time for you and everyone you know. What do you hope for?
I hope to be able to cover the rent every month.
Are you being facetious? Because you said you retired and vegetated 30 years ago. So aren't you? Is that a problem? Or were you
Yes, rent is always a problem.
Well, don't you get royalties every time somebody puts up one of your plays?
Rent keeps going up.
True. Well, so what do you do then? How do you, when things are tight, what's your go-to?
I usher at a theater. I appear somewhere. I sell something. I do what everybody does to pay the rent.
Have you thought maybe about adjunct teaching?
About what?
About teaching as like an adjunct in local colleges and stuff. The pay is for shit, believe me, but...
I'm always being asked if I want to teach courses in playwriting. I never studied it. I just did it. I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to teach anybody to do an art.
Oh, okay. Well, then here's the last question for you. Between when you wrote The Haunted Host and the first couple of plays or few plays that you did at Cino, and say 10 or 15 or 20 years later in the pieces you were writing later on, what did you learn? What did you teach yourself by doing over and over again?
Well, I learned more and more what was practical and possible in theater. I learned to write scripts that were producible, to write roles that helped actors act them properly, to write dialogue that did as much of the work as possible for the performers. But above all, simply to amuse and to entertain myself, and trust that what entertained and amused me would entertain any audience.
Well, you have absolutely amused and entertained us here in the neighborhood. We wish you best of health, best of luck, good reviews for the revival of Judas at the Phoenix Ensemble, and all good things to you, Robert Patrick. Thank you so much for being with us.
And right back at you. Bye-bye.